Okay, so first things first, thank you very much, Rajiv, for putting this together, and especially to the volunteers who've come out. You guys have made this place a blast and solved all my problems. Not gonna lie, I was pretty nervous coming up here to present among all my peers, getting ready to be judged, but I feel better with the support of all you gentlemen. If the presentation is good, it's because Rajiv and the volunteers created the conditions, and if it's bad, it's because of me. That's how it goes. Okay. Coming soon, billions in bug bounties. So, for anybody who's watching, there's been an absolute explosion in bug bounties in blockchain. It completely blows away everything that has ever happened in the history of our space. For those of you who don't know, there was actually a very sizable market for vulnerabilities and exploits, with the primary buyers being nation states in the past, but all that is extremely opaque and not public. Now, with the rise of DeFi especially, there's been this huge rise in bounties. And while I know about it, because that's what I have to live and breathe every day and suffer through and also have a great time with all of you guys about, I'm cognizant that most people don't really understand what's driving it, what's going on here, and what the trajectory is. So my main goal here is to give you guys a glimpse into the future as to what's going to happen from all the data and the experiences that we've had, and then most especially get to questions as quickly as possible. So, David, Babel, please, show me the numbers ahead of time, because I think the questions are going to be more interesting than my presentation more generally. Okay, we're going to do a quick overview of what bug bounties used to be like in crypto, what bug bounties are like now, and where blockchain bug bounties are going. So, when we were starting Immunify, this is late 2020, we did a survey of all the bug bounties in the space. In aggregate, all the exchanges, all the wallets, all the projects, all the DeFi applications, all the on-chain applications, all the L1s, everything, $4 million in bounties across everybody. That's 150 plus projects. This was very sad. This was very sad. Additionally, you saw most projects in the space didn't even have bug bounty programs. Of course, there were general security problems with that, but they didn't even see the need. There were a few programs largely on HackerOne, but they were sad with low payouts and lots of bad reviews, people being very unhappy with the results, getting shafted in various ways. And the programs were primarily written by lawyers, which is how it works in the rest of the world. So when you read those lovely bug bounty programs everywhere, some very happy lawyer was like, I know exactly what to do to make this program successful. Let me do my part and remove all liability from my partner while preparing every legal tool against the potential good faith actor that I can possibly muster. That's bug bounties before we inherited all those standards in the space. It was very sad and lame. And that's a best case scenario. So very often you would find disclosures going on, and it would be worse than just not getting paid. You would also be treated like a criminal. They would say, you're trying to extort me. They would be like, oh, why are you out to get me? Why can't you just stop? It was, just imagine like you're trying to do a good deed for society. You're trying to help protect the project. You might even like it or know the people, and you get treated like dirt. There are exceptions to this. The Ethereum Foundation ran a great bug bounty program. Some of the exchanges like Kraken ran pretty effective bug bounty programs, but they really were exceptions. And the end result of that is 4 million in bounties. It's sad, nobody cares, and nobody was really, there wasn't major incentives for doing this type of activity when you could just be, either be making a protocol yourself or be a developer and make tons of money with none of this hassle and stress that nobody wants to deal with. So that's before. We call those the dark days. Very sad. Now, when we were poking around in 2020, so all this came out, Immunify specifically came out of our own use of a variety of smart contracts, and we realized that things were about to get much worse. We saw these products getting more and more successful. We were very excited about their future. We were contributing to it ourselves, but knowing and having been around for the previous years, 2017, 2016, 2015, 2014, 2013, we saw some patterns. You had forks of forks of forks of forks of forks, which we all saw explode with DeFi. The devs who were coming in excited and bullish about the technology didn't understand all the nuances of it. Frankly, even those of us who have been working with it for ages still don't understand all the nuance of it. It's just extremely complex. Then with the rise of DeFi, we concluded that there would be a huge explosion, and these projects, primarily by people who probably shouldn't be launching them, and that's okay, but it was going to lead to a lot of suffering. Blockchain team sizes are super small, which means we don't have resources for security and we don't have great management expertise or team building expertise generally. And so security was always going to be on the afterburner. And the contracts were becoming more and more complex. Composability is a real thing. And I don't know if like MakerDAO, an amazing project, you look at what they've built and you try to understand it for the first time and you're like, whoa, okay. That's a lot of stuff. This is going to take me a month or a few years, I don't know, a while to get through it all. You're going to have novel vulnerabilities come up. A whole bunch of those have happened, for example, with all these bridge cases. And then finally, while we do have great auditors in the space who have been doing good work, the incentives at that time was to focus in on what you're good at and deliver compelling value. With all this activity going on and so much innovation happening in the space, there was just no way for someone to really keep up with that. But that wasn't going to stop many of the parties from selling themselves that way. And so, you know, you have people, I don't know, maybe Certic is a reasonable example, who would not necessarily represent the level of expertise necessary for this work. And I'm sure they and everybody else did good work, but the reality is it's just impossible to stay on top of all the activity these days. Nevertheless, auditors are treated like a generalist tool. This is a recipe for much suffering. All these factors together mean you're basically guaranteed catastrophic exploits in abundance. This was our conclusion in early 2020. This all came to pass, as we have now all observed with the endless exploits going on. We knew things had to change. The question was what? We were researching fairly early on, what are all the different ways, the different tools in the stack? How do we actually prevent this? What are the tools available at our disclosure? Our conclusion at that time was that the security stack was extremely nascent. We didn't have any monitoring that was effective at that time. Auditing was not super specialized. We didn't have great incident response in almost any of the teams in general. Almost none of the teams had war rooming experience or the processes for dealing with that. But certainly the weakest area, and we thought would have the most impact, was in bug bounties. Bug bounties were completely underused, and they were kind of worthless, quite frankly, given the nature of the value at stake. And so I concluded that based on and driven by the explosion of exploitation that would go on, we would necessarily have to make huge investments as an industry into our very last line of defense. And that's what bug bounties are. The last line of defense, after every layer in your security Swiss cheese has failed to block, you have that last layer, a bug bounty, which is basically a request. Please, if you find something, if you find anything, I will pay you and glorify you to protect me and my users. So please do it. That is what they are in reality. And at the time when we were doing our research, you know, we had that sad $4 million in rewards. So they're like, please, we want your help to save our billions of dollars no matter what, and we're willing to pay you $10,000 for it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's not gonna survive. The force of business incentives and personal interest is going to make those numbers explode. So early last year, I made the prediction there's going to be $10 million. $10 million bug bounties, a single bounty, $10 million. This is going to become a thing. This is going to become a standard in the space. Everybody laughed me out, quite fairly so. I don't blame anyone for it. It was extremely audacious. But the reality is just, we need the security talent. We need people looking through basically every piece of high value smart contract code and L1 code and so on and so forth. But the incentives weren't there, and there needed to be. And our technology is too nascent, too new, and too immature alongside our community, if you will. We just don't have enough security expertise. You guys are basically the chosen few to service all the needs in the space. And so exploits were a certainty. There has to be bug bounties because there's no other place where after every previous layer has failed, you can just continue to throw money and actually get good ROI. Bug bounties are the only thing that can provide that. And this is indeed what we found. So we constated that there would be this virtual cycle. This has proven to be the case. At the core of it is you have high impact disclosures, things that are very bad, things that are very public. This is going to show tremendous business value in terms of ROI. The leaders of projects are going to see this. This is going to drive bounty growth. This is going to attract the security expertise that we actually need to secure the space. That security expertise is going to then filter out not just to bug bounties, but to auditing firms, to projects, and so on and so forth. But we need to drain other areas of security talent, and the only way to do that is just with basically very blunt incentives. This all came to pass. So for example, on Immunify, we've done multiple billion-dollar saves in terms of the level of potential exploitation that could have occurred, or in many cases was in the process of occurring. And the typical ROI on that is somewhere in the realm of 100x relative to what you paid on the bounty. So we knew that this was going to percolate through the space, and people would start to realize these numbers really do make sense. Moreover, let's take the flip side. The major gap in driving adoption of bug bounties in this space was showing the value to the projects, because it's such an insane thing. If I go to you and I say, hey, look, we have this really great guy and he spent 10 hours on your stuff, and so you should pay him $10 million because he found a great bug. It's so out of this world. It's really crazy for any normal person, never mind a business person, to think about that until you do the calculation, you realize, oh, okay, well, the entirety of the equity value or the token value that I've built could all be eviscerated in a single moment. That's the reality of the environment that we face. It's this hostile, and it's getting more adversarial by the day. So the virtuous cycle is real. Bug bounties are going to get bigger. This came to pass. But what we see today is really just the early innings of what's to come. So we have two great projects, Wormhole, MakerDAO, both very strong security teams, both have $10 million bounties, and we have a host of other projects that are following suit. There's going to be more and more and more of them. We ourselves have now paid, 25 is a bit outdated, well in excess of $25 million in bounties to our hackers. We're providing those incentives, we're proving they're real. We're saying, here, look, if you do something that's good for the community, we really will, pay you a lifetime's worth of money. It's not a joke. Today we have about $136 million in bounties on Immunify. It has been 15 months, 16 months since we started. That's $4 million in the space total to $136 million on us alone. That's not inclusive of all the independent programs in the space, which should add another $40 to $50 million in bounties. This is a pretty steep trajectory in terms of the growth. We've saved, at least for us, around 30 billion, priced most conservatively, much more if you look at token impact and the value of potential loss on top of platforms. But that's just us. You can talk to the DDoP guys, they've done their own parts, Change Security, they've done their own parts, IOC, they've done their own parts. Lots of great teams, Open Zeppelin, they've done their own parts. Like the sheer opportunities we've had for those billion-dollar doomsday scenarios, single moments where that much money could have been lost. We're well past a dozen at this point that ended up being solved by responsible disclosure. Okay? Ronin hack was, of course, around 600 mil. Looks pretty bad. We have, again, at least a dozen cases where that could have been multiples of that worse. Think about the consequences of that to the space. Right, when those events happen, what they do for our credibility and our prestige. Thankfully, projects are starting to realize the value of bug bounty. Now, most of the major projects are launching bug bounties. We have 300 with us. There's should be about another 100, 150 with a variety of other providers and on independent resources. And that's just phenomenal to see. This is becoming a standard. It's not that hard to do to set them up. Yes, it requires a lot of expertise in the setup process, but compared to the potential value of that, it's pretty phenomenal. And we're going to see a lot more of them. But the future, we're here for the future. Where's the future going? The future is going into the billions of dollars. Why? All these pressures in terms of the inherent vulnerability of the technologies that we create no other way than to increase the demand. The only people who can protect against these vulnerabilities are you all here. And there's really not enough of you. Frankly, I don't see how we're going to have a sufficient security community. I don't think we're ever going to keep up with the demand, not over the next 5 or 10 years. It's hard for me to imagine, given the amount of training and work and risk all of you have to undertake to build these skill sets and be willing to engage in responsible disclosure behavior. It's just, there's going to be a severe crunch in security talent for everyone. And this is going to make the kind of talent that can spot billion-dollar vulnerabilities in extreme high demand. The way we're going to attract that demand, once a project has made investments into every part of the security stack proceeding, which they will, serious $100,000, multi-million-dollar investments in every proceeding step, from audits, tooling, monitoring, et cetera, it won't be enough. All the remaining capital will flow into bug bounties as the very last line of defense that you hope you will never, ever have to use. That's why this is coming. How certain am I? We did a very conservative estimation on where this growth was going to come. It was late last year, still in the first year of our business, very young, still very fresh. Well, I'll skip this one. I think we covered a lot of it. We estimated that on the most conservative basis, we would probably go to about 200 mil in bounties. Today, we are well ahead of that in terms of the timeline. We expect to beat that soundly. So what's the road to $1 billion in bounties? Well, if we maintain the current rate 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and that's looking at us alone. That's not looking at all the other great partners in the field. There are other good firms, there are other good teams and independent bounties that are being done who are also going to add to this number. And we're all competing for the same talent. The thing that drives that talent's interests is the bounties, and so the projects are going to compete to capture it. And with that will come the payouts. Again, on a conservative basis, we estimated we would get to around 66 million in payouts by the end of the year. At the current trajectory, we are well ahead of that as well. All this is speeding up. It's not slowing down. And I hope it will make all of you who choose to act in the interests of the community and do what's good for the users who just don't have the power to protect themselves very wealthy people. I think that is a very good trade. That's mostly it for the quick kind of presentation on the pressures that are moving the bounty sizes up and how that is really going to lead to a dramatic increase in the size of this space and also all the pressures on it. We've talked about the North Koreans. Well, you better be prepared for those types of attacks as an institution because they're coming one way or another, and your pipeline is a target. But what would be the most valuable thing now? Questions. That was a lot of words. What does anybody want to know? What do people don't understand? How can I be most helpful?
What you just say, it's both really good news and really bad news. The reason I say really good news in the panel before somebody brought up the issue that in this space, many projects come from a guy that had an idea and puts it up together, and that could be for any of the things. How could you, and this goes for the tooling too, help those guys that are going to be left in the dark? There won't be, nobody would work for a bounty for those guys that couldn't pay at the beginning, and at the beginning, especially for decentralized systems, where there may be already grown enough in size of value in there, but they don't have any income to pay. How could you help that so that the community will safer?
Let me mirror that back to you, make sure I understand. You asking how can we help small, decentralized projects that don't have organization expertise in this area or the resources to do so?
Right. The small projects are they will also need some defense, like a bounty program, but they won't have the money to do it, and sure. And they will have resources at stake, but it's not theirs.
Sure.
And so for the community itself, there needs to be a solution because nobody will work for them.
Sure. Okay, there's layers of different problems here. The first problem, which is underappreciated, is just the fact that we don't have enough talent, and so talent is drawn to the largest opportunities. That's always going to be how it is. We don't get to make the rules of that game, but we do influence the outcomes by investing a lot in training. So at Immunify, we train, educate constantly so that we can increase the size of the talent pool to work on things. You'll often find that, especially the younger security personnel, will prefer to work on the lower bounties and kind of cut their teeth on that. And so there's a bit of a pipeline of these new experts in the field moving into the smaller bounties. We like to help with that. Number two is we help the projects as much as possible. Even the small projects, it doesn't matter to us if you can't afford a giant bounty. We'll still help you set everything up. We'll structure it for you. We'll make it, basically raise awareness for it in our communities, draw attention to it as much as we can. You just need to ask, and we will do our part to support in a variety of number of ways. The third thing is, the third part of the problem that we're tackling is, it's not just a matter of going after the greatest rewards. A big problem is matching. Security personnel tend to have a very specialized skill sets. And so, someone who is very, very good at, say, options protocols may not be very good at dealing with bridges, or vice versa, or any other variety of permutations. Meanwhile, there's only a limited set of potential projects in each of those areas. So one thing we're working towards at Immunify is creating ways to match the right security personnel with the right projects so that the projects are getting a steady stream of interest that is customized specifically to their needs. But this is not an easy problem to work on, so it's going to take us some time to really mature that into something where we can go up to a smaller project and say, just tell us what you need, we'll make sure traffic gets to you. Does that give some context?
Awesome. I'm sure we all have a billion questions on billion-dollar bounties, but Mitchell is also going to be there on a panel on bug bounties and white hats. That's going to happen in the next half hour or so. Thanks, Mitchell, for joining us as a speaker, and we'll see you soon on a panel.